Good evening, traveler of the silent paths, and welcome. Welcome to this sacred space, carved from the deep, quiet heart of the night. The sun, the fiery barge of the god Ra, has completed its long journey across the sky and has descended into the duat, the mystical underworld, leaving our world cloaked in a beautiful and profound darkness. Let the stillness of this moment be your sanctuary. Take a slow, deep breath and imagine you are inhaling the cool, dry air of a desert night, scented with the faint, sweet perfume of lotus blossoms from a distant river. And as you exhale, feel the heat and the hurry of your day dissipate, vanishing into the vast, starry expanse above, like a whisper lost in the great silent desert. There are no demands on you here, no duties to perform. Your only task is to allow yourself to become still, to listen, and to let your spirit drift back through the millennia, back through the sands of time, to a civilization that seemed to touch eternity. Tonight, we leave the marble halls of Olympus behind. Our journey takes us southward, to a long, fertile ribbon of life cradled by endless desert. We travel to the land of two horizons, the kingdom of the black and the red, the civilization that rose from the life-giving mud of a sacred river. We are going to ancient Egypt. Imagine this land, a place where life and death, order and chaos were in a constant, delicate and beautiful dance. It was a land defined by its duality. There was the black land, the Kemet, the narrow, fertile strip of dark, rich soil on either side of the great Nile River, a place of life, of abundance, of civilization. And there was the red land, the Desert, the vast, scorching and lifeless desert that stretched to the horizons, a place of chaos, of sterility, and of powerful, untamed gods. The people who lived here did not see the world as we do. For them, the physical world and the world of the gods were not separate. They were two sides of the same reality, intricately woven together, and the hieroglyphs carved into their temple walls were not just writing. They were living, magical symbols, a language that could command the very forces of creation. Magic was not a fairy tale in this land. It was a fundamental science. It was Heir, the divine energy that the gods used to create the world, and that mortals, with the right knowledge and the right words, could learn to wield. Magic was in the sacred words chanted by the priests, in the intricate amulets worn for protection, and in the profound, secret rituals performed in the darkness of the temples. And in this world, this grand stage of gods and magic, there was one goddess whose name was synonymous with the very art of Heir itself. She was not the most distant or the most powerful in terms of raw physical strength, but she was the most intelligent, the most cunning, the most resilient, and the most magically adept of all the gods. Her name was Isis, in the Egyptian tongue, Aset, and she was the most devoted of wives and the most fiercely protective of mothers. But to see her only in these roles is to see only two facets of a magnificent, multifaceted jewel. Before all else, Isis was a force of pure divine intelligence and magical power. Her title was Wet Hekau, the great enchantress, she who is great of magic. Her power was not in the brute force of a desert storm, nor in the unthinking fire of the sun. Her power was in her knowledge. She knew the secret names of things, the true names that held the key to their very essence. She understood the intricate web of connections that bound the universe together, and she knew how to pluck those threads, how to reweave them to create a new reality. She was the goddess of the whispered spell, of the potent magical knot, of the healing potion, and of the sacred, transformative ritual. She was the divine physician who could knit together broken bones, and the celestial navigator who could guide the souls of the dead through the treacherous paths of the underworld. But her magic was not a dark or selfish art. It was almost always used in the service of others, in the service of healing, of protection, and most of all, in the service of love. For her story is, above all else, a love story. It is the story of a love so powerful, so absolute, that it refused to be broken even by death itself. It is the tale of a goddess whose devotion was so unyielding that she would challenge the fundamental laws of the cosmos, descend into the darkest of sorrows, and master the greatest of all magics, all for the sake of the one she loved. Her journey will take us down the length of the sacred Nile. It will lead us to the courts of foreign kings, into the dark and tangled marshes of the delta, and to the very threshold of life and death. We will witness an act of terrible betrayal, a descent into profound grief, and finally, the greatest magical act of resurrection the world had ever seen. So let the rhythmic pulse of the ancient music be the beating of a ritual drum. guiding your mind into a state of deep, meditative calm. We are about to enter the world of the pharaohs, of pyramids that scrape the stars, of gods with the heads of animals, and of a magic as real and as powerful as the river that gave it life. This is the story of Isis, the great enchantress, and it begins, as all life in Egypt does, with the great family of the gods, in the beginning of all things, in the time before time, known as the Zet Tepi, the first occasion. There was the great and formless watery chaos of Nu. From this primordial ocean, the first god, the creator, willed himself into existence. This was Ra, the sun, the father of all. Ra brought forth the first divine pair, Shu, the god of the air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. And they, in turn, gave birth to the second great pair, whose union would define the very shape of the physical world. Their children were Gib, the god of the earth, and Nut, the goddess of the sky. Gib and Nut were locked in a passionate, inseparable embrace. Nut, the starry expanse of the heavens, lay upon Geb, the solid foundation of the earth, and there was no space between them for anything to exist. Ra, the sun god, seeing that his creation was being stifled, commanded their father, Shu, the god of the air, to separate them. And so, Shu pushed his daughter, Nut, upwards, lifting her vast star-dusted body high above, creating the canopy of the heavens. He held her there, creating the space for our world, the very air we breathe, between the sky and the earth. Geb, the earth god, lay below, forever gazing up with a deep and sorrowful longing at the wife from whom he had been separated. But Nut was already with child, destined to bear the next generation of gods who would rule the world. Ra, however, had grown fearful of the power of these new gods to come. He decreed a curse upon Nut that she would not be able to give birth on any day of the existing calendar year. At that time, the year was only 360 days long. Nut was heartbroken. Her children trapped within her, unable to be born. In her desperation, she sought the counsel of the wise and clever Thoth, the god of knowledge, of writing, and of magic. Thoth, who knew the secrets of the universe, devised a brilliant plan to circumvent Ra's decree. He went to the moon god, Khonsu, and challenged him to a game of senate, a game of skill and chance. Thoth wagered his wisdom, and Khonsu, in his pride, wagered a portion of his own silver light. Thoth, the master of knowledge, won again, and with each victory, he claimed a fraction of the moon's luminescence. He gathered all the moonlight he had won until he had enough to create 5 new extra days. These 5 days were not part of the old calendar. They did not belong to any month. They were outside the scope of Ra's curse, and on these 5 days, one by one, Nut was finally able to give birth to her 5 divine children, the great gods who would complete the Aeneid, the sacred council of Heliopolis. On the first day, the eldest was born, Osiris, the noble and handsome god who was destined to rule the world of men. His birth was hailed as a great and joyous event. On the second day, a second son was born, Horus the elder, a sky god whose destiny was intertwined with the kingship of the heavens. On the third day, a third son was born, but his arrival was violent. Set, the god of chaos, of the desert and of storms, did not wait to be born. He clawed his way out of his mother's side, a being of fierce and untamable energy from his very first breath. And on the fourth day, the first of the great goddesses was born. She emerged into the world with a quiet, knowing grace, her eyes already shining with a profound intelligence. In the Egyptian tongue, her name, Aset, meant she of the throne. From the moment of her birth, her destiny was linked to the very concept of royal power and legitimacy. She was not just a goddess, she was the living embodiment of the throne upon which all just kings would one day sit. It was said that she was born already in love with her brother, Osiris. Their bond was not something that grew over time. It was a fundamental truth of their existence, a divine and fated connection that had existed even within their mother's starry womb. They were 2 halves of a single, harmonious soul. Finally, on the 5th and final day, the last of the children was born, Nephthys, a goddess of the night, of shadows, and of the hidden things. Her destiny, too, would be forever intertwined with her siblings, a goddess of shadow fated to be the companion and the wife of the god of chaos, Set, and so the new generation of gods was complete. They were a family of profound and complex dynamics, the noble king, the chaotic usurper, the wise and magical queen, and the shadowy sister. Their stories, their loves, their rivalries, and their tragedies would become the great mythological drama that would define the very soul of ancient Egypt. Isis, from this very beginning, understood her place. Her purpose was to be the partner, the counselor, and the magical protector of her beloved Osiris. He was the benevolent king who would teach humanity how to live, and she was the wise queen who would give him the strength, the legitimacy, and the magical power to do so. Her name was the throne, and the throne was her. She was the foundation upon which all the order and prosperity of her brother's coming reign would be built. When the great sun god Ra decided to withdraw from the world of men, the time had come for a new ruler to take his place. The kingship of the earth was passed down to his chosen heir, the eldest and noblest of Nut's children, Osiris, and by his side, as his co-ruler, his queen, and the other half of his soul, stood his beloved sister wife, Isis. Their union was not just a marriage, it was the dawning of a new era for all of creation. Together, they were the perfect embodiment of a balanced and harmonious rule. Osiris was the benevolent father, the gentle teacher. Isis was the wise mother, the clever protector. Their love for each other radiated outwards, becoming the very foundation of a peaceful and prosperous world. Before their reign, the people of Egypt were said to live in a primitive and chaotic state. They were nomads, wandering the land without laws, without knowledge, fighting amongst themselves for scraps of food. Osiris, his heart filled with a deep compassion for the plight of humanity, descended among them. He did not rule with an iron fist or a terrifying display of power. He ruled as a gentle teacher. He gathered the scattered peoples together along the fertile banks of the Nile. He taught them how to renounce their savage ways. He showed them how to read the rhythms of the sacred river, how to plant and to harvest grain, turning them from hunters into farmers. He taught them how to cultivate the vine and to brew the first beer. He gave them laws to live by, a structure for their society that was based on justice and fairness, not on strength alone. He taught them how to honor the gods, establishing the very first temples and rituals. And all the while, Isis was by his side, his indispensable partner in the great work of civilization. If Osiris was the teacher, Isis was the one who gave his lessons depth and meaning. She was the goddess of the home, and she taught the women the domestic arts, how to grind the grain he had shown them how to grow, how to bake the first bread, and how to weave the first linen to clothe their families. She was also a goddess of medicine and of healing. She taught the people the secret properties of the plants that grew along the riverbank, showing them how to create remedies for sickness and for pain. She was a source of profound comfort, the divine mother to whom the people could turn in their times of suffering. But most importantly, she was his magical guardian. Her divine knowledge of Heir, of magic, was a protective shield that surrounded their kingdom. She knew the secret words to ward off dangerous beasts, to protect the newborn from scorpion stings, and to ensure that the sacred Nile would flood its banks each year, bringing the rich black silt that was the source of all life. Their love for each other was the engine of this golden age. Their perfect harmony was reflected in the world they had created. The kingdom of Egypt flourished under their gentle rule. The harvests were always bountiful, the river always brought its life-giving flood, and the people lived in a state of ma'at, a state of divine order, of truth, of justice, and of perfect cosmic balance. There was no war, no famine, no disease. It was a paradise on earth, a direct reflection of the perfect love between its divine king and queen. Isis, in these peaceful years, was the embodiment of the throne itself. She was the source of her husband's legitimacy. It was through his marriage to her, she of the throne, that Osiris's right to rule was made absolute. The throne of Egypt did not just belong to the king, it belonged to the royal pair, united in a sacred bond. She was his wisest counselor, his most beloved companion. His most beloved companion was his wisest counselor. Imagine them in these idyllic times. See them walking hand in hand through the fields of golden wheat, the gratitude of their people following them like a warm and gentle breeze. See them sitting together on their twin thrones, dispensing justice with a calm and compassionate wisdom. See the deep, unwavering love in their eyes. A love that was not a fiery, chaotic passion, but a deep, steady, and generative force that nourished an entire civilization. This was the world as it was meant to be, a world ruled by a just king and a wise queen, a world where the love of the gods was made manifest in the peace and prosperity of their people. It was a perfect, harmonious song, a delicate and beautiful balance, but in the great drama of the cosmos, no golden age can last forever. Harmony, by its very nature, invites discord. And in the farthest, driest corners of the kingdom, in the red, chaotic lands of the desert, a jealous heart was watching this perfect world with a burning, hateful envy. A dark and terrible shadow was growing, a shadow that longed to tear down this beautiful creation and silence its harmonious song once and for all. Beyond the narrow, fertile strip of the Black Land, beyond the life-giving reach of the Nile, lay the other half of Egypt's soul, the Red Land. This was the Deshret, the endless, scorching desert, a realm of rock, of sand, and of a stark, terrifying emptiness. It was a world of chaos, of violence, and of the unpredictable fury of the desert storm, and its master was Set, the brother of Osiris and Isis. Set was a god of immense and terrible power. He was depicted with the head of a strange, unknown animal, a creature of chaos. He was the embodiment of all the forces that stood in opposition to the orderly, predictable world of the Nile Valley. While Osiris represented the gentle growth of the harvest, Set was the sudden, violent storm that could flatten it. While Isis represented the healing arts, Set was the god of disease and of the venomous creatures of the desert. From his lonely kingdom of red sand, he watched the world his brother had created, and his heart was consumed by a bitter and burning envy. He saw the love the people had for Osiris, he saw the peace and the prosperity of the Black Land, he saw the deep, unbreakable bond between Osiris and Isis, and he saw it all as a personal insult. He believed that he, as the god of strength and of the untamed wild, was the more fitting ruler. He saw Osiris's gentle ways, his reliance on laws and on agriculture, as a form of weakness. He despised the perfect, harmonious world his brother and sister had built, and a dark and terrible ambition began to grow in his heart, to tear it all down, to silence the music of that golden age, and to seize the throne of Egypt for himself. But Osiris was beloved by all, and he was protected by the powerful magic of his wife, Isis. A direct, open assault was impossible. Set knew he would need a plan of extraordinary cunning, a trap that would appeal to his brother's trusting nature and turn his own virtues against him. And so, in the secret, shadowy depths of his desert fortress, he began his conspiracy. He gathered to his cause 72 of the lesser gods and spirits who shared his jealousy and his lust for power. And together they devised a plot of beautiful, terrible, and intricate cruelty. First, Set secretly obtained the exact measurements of his brother, Osiris. Every dimension, from his height to the breadth of his shoulders, was recorded with a chilling precision. Then, with this knowledge, he commissioned the creation of a magnificent chest, a sarcophagus of unparalleled beauty. It was not a grim box of stone, but a masterpiece of art. It was crafted from the finest imported cedar wood, its surface inlaid with breathtaking patterns of pure gold, of silver, and of precious, glittering jewels. It was an object of such exquisite beauty and perfect craftsmanship that it was fit not for a burial, but for a king's most prized treasure. It was designed to be irresistible. When the beautiful, deadly trap was complete, Set announced that he would be holding a grand and magnificent banquet, a feast to honor his brother and to celebrate the prosperity of the kingdom. He invited all the gods and the nobles of Egypt to his hall. Osiris, whose own heart was free of guile and suspicion, was touched by his brother's gesture. He saw it as a sign that Set's long-simmering jealousy had finally cooled, an olive branch offered from the red desert to the black earth. Isis, however, whose wisdom was far more perceptive and whose heart was attuned to the subtle currents of magic and of intent, felt a cold knot of dread. She did not trust her brother, Set. His sudden generosity felt like the unnatural stillness of the air before a great and terrible storm. She begged Osiris not to go, to remain with her in the safety of their own court. But Osiris, in his nobility, would not insult his brother by refusing such a grand invitation. He calmed his wife's fears, assuring her that this was a time for celebration, a time to finally heal the rift in their divine family. And so, against the quiet, desperate pleas of his wise and loving queen, he made his fateful decision. He would attend the banquet. He walked into his brother's hall, leaving the protection of Isis's magic behind him, stepping unknowingly into the center of a perfectly crafted and inescapable trap. The feast was a grand affair, the hall filled with music, with laughter, and with an abundance of food and wine. But beneath the surface of the celebration, a deadly conspiracy was holding its breath, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The beautiful, empty chest, the centerpiece of the evening's entertainment, sat in the middle of the hall, a silent and patient predator waiting for its prey. The grand hall of Set was a dazzling spectacle of feigned celebration. Torches cast flickering, dancing shadows on the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, exotic spices, and the sweet, heavy perfume of wine. The 72 conspirators, their hearts filled with dark purpose, laughed and drank alongside the unsuspecting guests, their smiles as beautiful and as false as the jeweled chest that sat in the center of the room. Osiris, noble and trusting, moved among the guests with a gracious and kingly air. He drank the wine his brother poured for him. He laughed at the jokes, and he saw nothing of the web of treachery that was being woven around him. He saw only a celebration, a reconciliation, a joyful family reunion. As the night wore on and the guests grew merry with wine, Set finally unveiled the centerpiece of his plot. He called for silence and, with a grand theatrical gesture, he presented the magnificent chest to the assembled company. He announced that this beautiful object, a masterpiece of craftsmanship, would be given as a gift to any god or noble present who could fit perfectly within its dimensions. A wave of excited murmurs went through the hall. The conspirators, playing their parts perfectly, feigned a great and covetous desire for the beautiful prize. One by one, they stepped forward to try their luck. A large god would try, only to find himself too broad of shoulder. A tall noble would attempt it, only to find himself too long of limb. Each failure was met with good-natured laughter and more wine, the entire affair framed as a light-hearted party game. Finally, after all others had tried and failed, Set turned to his brother, Osiris, with a challenging smile. "Surely you, my lord and king," he said, his voice dripping with a false brotherly affection. "Surely you must try. The chest is a thing of beauty, and it seems to have been made for a god of your perfect and royal stature." The other guests, caught up in the spirit of the game, urged him on. And Osiris, his heart warm with wine and with the joy of the evening, saw no harm in it. He laughed, and with the easy grace of a confident king, he stepped towards the beautiful chest. In that moment, a silence fell over the hall. Every eye was upon him. He lay down within the chest, his divine form fitting into the space with an impossible, chilling precision. It was a perfect fit, as if it had been measured from his very soul. He smiled up at his brother, a look of amused surprise on his face, and in that instant the trap was sprung. The mood in the hall shifted from celebration to a cold, brutal efficiency. Before Osiris could even react, Set and his 72 conspirators lunged forward. They slammed the heavy lid of the chest shut, plunging the king of Egypt into a sudden and shocking darkness. The sound of the lid closing echoed through the hall like the crack of doom. They did not pause. With a furious, practiced speed, they drove long leaden nails into the lid, sealing it shut. Then, they poured molten lead into every crack and seam, making the beautiful chest an airtight, inescapable prison. The other, innocent guests scattered in terror, their drunken laughter turning to screams of horror as they finally understood the terrible betrayal that had just unfolded. But Set and his followers were not finished. Their work was driven by a cold, hateful purpose. They lifted the heavy, sealed chest, now a royal coffin, onto their shoulders. They carried it from the hall, out into the darkness of the night, their footsteps heavy with the weight of their crime. They marched to the banks of the great Nile River, its sacred waters flowing dark and silent under the moon. And there, with a final, triumphant shout of hatred, they heaved the magnificent chest into the river. The coffin of the king splashed into the dark water, and the current, strong and swift, immediately caught it. It began to drift away, carried out towards the vast and unknowable expanse of the great green, the Mediterranean Sea. In a single, terrible night of betrayal, the music had stopped. The light of the world, the benevolent and just King Osiris, had been extinguished, his body now a prisoner in a jeweled box, lost somewhere in the dark and lonely waters. The sacred order of Mat was shattered, and the reign of chaos, in the form of the treacherous god Set, was about to begin. A universe away, in her own palace, Isis, the wise and loving queen, suddenly felt a cold and terrible premonition, a sharp psychic pain that lanced through her heart. She did not know what had happened, but she knew, with the unshakable certainty of a soul connected to its other half, that something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. Her beloved was gone. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, but in the heart of Isis, a darkness far deeper than any night had fallen. The terrible premonition of the night before had solidified into a cold, crushing certainty. Her husband, the light of her life and the king of the world, had not returned. The bond that had connected their souls since birth now felt like a frayed thread, a painful, aching void where a vibrant connection had once been. She did not need a messenger to tell her what had happened. She knew. with the deep, intuitive wisdom that was her very essence, that her brother Set's banquet had been a trap, and that her beloved Osiris was gone. A cry of pure, undiluted anguish tore from her throat, a sound so filled with sorrow that it was said to have shaken the very foundations of the temples and caused the lotus flowers on the Nile to weep tears of dew. This was not the measured, regal pronouncement of a queen. It was the raw, primal scream of a soul that has been ripped in two. In that moment she was no longer Isis, the queen of Egypt, the mistress of the throne. She was simply a wife who had lost her husband, a woman whose world had crumbled into dust. Her grief was a physical, transformative force. She took her royal headdress, the symbol of her power and her status, and tore it from her head. She let down her long, beautiful hair, a traditional sign of deep mourning. She ripped her magnificent royal robes into shreds, casting aside the finery of her courtly life. She smeared her face with dust and ashes from a cold hearth, obscuring her divine beauty beneath a mask of sorrow. She had shed the skin of her old life. The queen was gone, and in her place stood a wanderer, a solitary seeker, her heart consumed by a single desperate purpose to find the body of her beloved husband. For in the beliefs of the ancient Egyptians, a soul could not find peace in the afterlife, the field of reeds, unless its body was properly preserved and given the correct burial rites. To leave his body lost to the world was to condemn his spirit to an eternity of restless wandering. This she could not and would not allow, and so her great and sorrowful search began. She did not gather an army to challenge Set for the throne. Her grief was too personal, her mission too sacred for a war of politics. This was a quest of the heart, one she had to undertake alone. She left the safety and the sterile comfort of her palace and began to wander the length and breadth of the Black Land, her bare feet treading the very earth that had once prospered under her husband's gentle rule. She was a lonely, weeping figure, a stark and sorrowful contrast to the vibrant, life-filled world around her. The people of Egypt, who had once hailed her as their great and benevolent queen, now saw a grieving widow, her divine face etched with a pain so profound it was almost unbearable to look at. She followed the banks of the great Nile, the very river that had carried her husband away from her. She questioned everyone she met, her voice, once so full of command, now soft and choked with sorrow. She asked the fishermen casting their nets if they had seen a magnificent jeweled chest floating on the water. She asked the ferrymen who guided their skiffs through the reeds if they had heard any news. But no one had seen anything. The great river held its secrets close. Days turned into weeks. The sun beat down on her, and the long, lonely nights were filled with her quiet, ceaseless weeping. But her resolve never wavered. Her love was a compass, her grief a fuel. Every step she took was a prayer. Every question she asked was a spell. An act of faith in a world that had suddenly become so dark and so empty. She was a single point of pure, unwavering devotion in a universe that had been thrown into chaos. This was the beginning of her legend, the first steps on a long and arduous path that would test her magic, her courage, and the sheer, unbreakable strength of her love to their very limits. The days of aimless, grief-stricken wandering began to slowly transform into a focused and determined quest. The first overwhelming wave of sorrow had crashed over Isis, and what remained in its wake was not despair, but a cold, clear, and powerful resolve. She was not just a grieving widow, she was Wet Heko, the great enchantress. And it was time to unleash the full, subtle power of her divine knowledge. She realized that the world of men, with their fleeting memories and their limited sight, could not help her. She needed to speak to older, wiser things. She needed to ask the very elements of the world for their secrets, to read the hidden messages in the wind and in the water. She went to the banks of the Nile, not as a weeping woman, but as a sorceress. She knelt by the water's edge, closing her eyes, her mind reaching out, not with a question, but with a command born of her divine will. She called upon the spirits of the river, the ancient currents that have flowed since the dawn of time, the ones that had carried her husband's prison away. She asked them to remember, to show her the path the chest had taken. The water remained silent, its secrets lost in the vast, churning expanse of the great green sea. She did not falter. She turned her attention to the winds. She climbed to the highest cliffs overlooking the delta, her tattered robes whipping around her. She lifted her face to the sky and began to chant, her voice a low, melodic hum that was not quite speech and not quite song. It was the language of magic, the ancient words of power that could command the very air. She called upon the north wind and the south wind, asking them what they had seen on their ceaseless journeys across the land and the sea. The winds, recognizing the authority in her voice, swirled around her, whispering their secrets into her ear. They spoke of a great and jeweled chest, tossed upon the waves, carried by a storm far from the shores of Egypt, towards the rising sun, to the distant land of Phoenicia. Her first clue. A flicker of hope in the vast darkness of her grief. Her methods grew more focused. She was not just asking questions anymore, she was actively seeking knowledge, using her divine insight to find those who might hold a piece of the puzzle. It was said that she learned from a group of children who were playing by the riverbank. In their innocent, unclouded minds, they held a clear memory of the day of the great feast. They told her they had seen a magnificent, glittering box being thrown into the river by the followers of the dark god, Set. This was the confirmation of her deepest fears, the final proof of her brother's treachery. The knowledge did not break her, it hardened her. Her grief was now forged with the cold, hard steel of a just and righteous anger. She used her magic to transform herself, to disguise her divine form, allowing her to move among mortals without being recognized. She could appear as an old, stooped woman, a simple market trader, or a young mother, allowing her to gather information, to listen to the quiet whispers and the marketplace gossip that might hold another clue. In this journey, she was not entirely alone. At times, she was accompanied by 7 lesser scorpion goddesses, powerful and loyal protectors who shielded her from the dangers of her journey and from the watchful eyes of Set's spies. They were the agents of her will, a silent, deadly entourage for the grieving queen. This was a new Isis. The gentle, domestic goddess of the Golden Age was gone, burned away in the fire of her grief. In her place was a formidable and cunning sorceress, a divine detective, her every sense attuned to the secret currents of the world. She was learning to wield her grief as a weapon, to focus her love into a powerful, searching light. Her journey was no longer a blind wandering. It was a purposeful pilgrimage. The whispers of the wind had given her a destination, the coast of Phoenicia. The words of the children had given her the confirmation of the crime. Her quest now had a direction and a purpose. She was no longer just searching for her husband's body. She was on a mission to reclaim what had been stolen, to restore the balance that had been so violently shattered, and to begin the long, arduous process of making her beloved whole again. With a final, determined look back at her own land of Egypt, Isis, the great enchantress, set her face towards the foreign shores of Byblos, her heart, a cold, steady flame of love and of a slow-burning, righteous fury. The whispers of the wind and the fragmented memories of children had given Isis a name, a destination, the ancient and prosperous city port of Byblos on the coast of Phoenicia. Following the path the winds had shown her, she journeyed across the sea, leaving the familiar landscape of Egypt behind for a world of strange trees, new gods, and foreign tongues. Meanwhile, the great jeweled chest containing the body of Osiris had completed its own long, sorrowful journey. After being tossed upon the waves of the great green sea, it had finally washed ashore on the coast of Byblos. It came to rest in the shallows among a thicket of young heather plants. And there a miracle occurred. A magnificent and magical tree, a great tamarisk or cedar, began to grow on that very spot. It grew with an impossible, supernatural speed, its roots wrapping around the sacred chest, its trunk rising to the heavens, enclosing the coffin of the lost god entirely within its woody heart. The tree that grew there was the largest and most fragrant that anyone in Phoenicia had ever seen, its presence so majestic that it seemed to be a divine thing in itself. The fame of this wondrous tree soon reached the ears of Malcunda, the king of Byblos. He came down to the shore to see it for himself, and was so overwhelmed by its size and its intoxicating scent that he ordered it to be cut down and brought to his palace. And so, the body of Osiris, hidden within the beautiful chest, which was itself hidden within the heart of the great tree, was brought into the very center of the royal palace of Byblos. There it stood, a silent, secret, and sacred pillar, its divine presence unknown to all. It was to this city that Isis finally arrived. She did not come as a great and powerful goddess demanding entry. She came as a humble, anonymous figure, her divine beauty veiled in sorrow and simple, tattered robes. She made her way not to the palace, but to the well at the city's edge, the place where the women of the palace would come to draw water and to exchange news. She sat there, day after day, a silent, grieving figure, speaking to no one. But her presence, even in its grief-stricken state, was undeniably powerful. The local women who came to the well felt a strange and beautiful aura around her. She smelled not of the dust of the road, but of the most exquisite perfumes. And though she was veiled, Her grace was that of a queen. Soon, a group of handmaidens from the royal palace came to the well. Isis, seeing her opportunity, finally spoke to them. Her voice was gentle and kind. She braided their hair with her skillful fingers and, with her divine breath, she infused their bodies with the heavenly scent of ambrosia. When the handmaidens returned to the palace, the queen, Astarte, was astonished. They carried with them a fragrance so beautiful, so otherworldly, that she knew it could not be of mortal origin. She demanded to know where they had acquired such a scent, and they told her of the strange, sad, and graceful foreign woman who sat by the well. The queen, her curiosity piqued, immediately sent for the mysterious stranger. And so, Isis was brought into the royal palace of Byblos, the very place where the hidden body of her husband stood as a central pillar. She could feel his presence, a faint, sorrowful hum in the very stones of the hall, a magnetic pull that had guided her here across the sea. Her heart knew she was close, but she did not reveal herself. Her plan required patience and cunning. The queen, charmed by Isis's quiet dignity and grace, invited her to stay in the palace and appointed her as the royal nursemaid to her own infant son. The great queen of Egypt, the most powerful sorceress in the cosmos, became a humble servant in a foreign court, all to remain close to the secret heart of the palace. She cared for the infant prince with a deep and tender love, but in her actions there was a strange magical purpose. A quest to find her husband was now intertwined with a secret and mysterious mission in the heart of the Byblos court. And so, Isis, the great queen, lived within the walls of the palace of Byblos, her true identity a carefully guarded secret. By day, she was the perfect nursemaid, a quiet and devoted servant to the royal family. She cared for the infant prince, the son of Queen Astarte, with a tenderness that won the queen's complete trust and affection. But when the sun went down and the palace fell into the quiet of the night, a different side of the nursemaid would emerge. Her work was not done, for Isis had developed a deep, divine love for the mortal child in her care, and she decided to bestow upon him a gift that only a goddess could give, the gift of immortality. Each night, after the palace was asleep, Isis would perform a strange and secret ritual. She would ensure all the doors to the great hall were barred, and then she would build up the great hearth fire until it roared, a column of blazing orange flame. She would then take the infant prince, and, with a gentle, loving hand, she would place him not beside the fire, but directly into its blazing, magical heart. The flames, to the horror of any mortal who might have witnessed it, would lick at the child's skin. But this was no ordinary fire. It was a divine, purifying flame, and it did not burn the child's mortal flesh. Instead, with each passing night, it slowly, patiently began to burn away his mortality, transmuting his human essence into something eternal and divine. And while the child rested in his cradle of fire, Isis herself would transform. She would shed her disguise as a humble nursemaid and change into the form of a swallow. She would then fly in ceaseless, sorrowful circles around the great, central pillar of the hall, the very pillar that held the hidden body of her beloved husband. Her flight was a silent, mournful vigil, and she would let out a series of high, piercing cries, a sound of such profound and otherworldly grief that it would haunt the dreams of those sleeping in the palace. The queen, Astarte, began to grow uneasy. She loved the strange, foreign nurse who cared for her son so well, but she was troubled by the stories of the mournful, bird-like cries that echoed through the palace at night, and by a sense of a powerful, secret magic at work within her own home. One night, her curiosity and her fear finally overcame her. She crept out of her bedchamber and made her way silently to the great hall. She found the doors barred, but she peered through a small crack in the wood. And what she saw shattered her understanding of the world. She saw the great hearth, blazing with an unnatural intensity. And she saw her own infant son, her beloved child, lying peacefully within the heart of the roaring flames. The queen did not understand the sacred ritual she was witnessing. She saw only her child in mortal danger. With a wild, terrified scream, she burst through the doors and snatched her son from the fire, breaking the magical process forever. In that instant, Isis, who had been circling the pillar as a swallow, transformed back into her own divine form. But she was not the humble, grieving woman the queen had known. She stood before her in all her terrible, majestic and sorrowful divinity, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and deep disappointment. "Foolish woman," her voice thundered, echoing with the power of a goddess. "I would have given your son eternity. I would have made him immortal, a god among men, but your mortal fear, your ignorance, has broken the spell. Now he will live and die as all mortals do. Isis's rage then softened, replaced by the deep, abiding grief that was the true ruler of her heart. She turned her gaze to the great, fragrant pillar that stood in the center of the hall, the pillar she had circled for so many nights in her sorrow. "But now," she said, her voice dropping to a tone of profound and sorrowful command, "you will give me what I have truly come for. You will give me what is hidden within that pillar." The king and queen, now understanding that they had been living with a goddess and unknowingly housing a god, immediately and fearfully agreed. They had their craftsmen carefully cut down the great pillar and open its woody heart. And there, nestled within the ancient wood, was the magnificent jeweled chest, its beauty still untarnished. With a cry that was both of joy and of profound pain, Isis threw herself upon the coffin of her husband. She kissed it, she caressed it, her wails of grief so loud and so terrible that the queen's younger child, who was also in the room, was said to have died of pure fright at the sound of a goddess's true and unrestrained sorrow. At long last, after a journey of such immense sorrow and strange detours, her first great quest was over. She had found him. With the chest placed upon a royal barge provided by the terrified king of Byblos, Isis, the great enchantress, finally began her journey home to Egypt, her beloved husband at her side once more. The journey back across the great green sea was a quiet and sacred one. The chaotic waves that had carried the chest away in tragedy were now calm and gentle, as if the ocean itself was honoring the queen's sorrowful prize. With the magnificent coffin of her husband safely on her royal barge, Isis sailed for Egypt, her heart a fragile vessel of both profound grief and a newly kindled, desperate hope. She did not sail for the great capital cities, for she knew that the spies of her brother, Set, were everywhere. Her work was far from over, and it required absolute secrecy. She guided the barge into the remote, labyrinthine marshes of the Nile Delta, a wild and secluded place of towering papyrus reeds, hidden waterways, and the lonely cries of waterbirds. Here, in the deep green heart of the wetlands, she could be safe from the prying eyes of the new king. She found a hidden, secret grove, a small island of solid ground surrounded by the dense, protective reeds. And there, with the help of her devoted sister, Nephthys, who had come to join her in her sorrow, she finally opened the great sealed chest. The body of her beloved Osiris lay within, perfectly preserved, his handsome face serene, as if he were merely sleeping. A great, shuddering wave of grief and love washed over Isis. She threw her arms around his cold, still form, her tears falling upon his face, her voice a torrent of whispered endearments and sorrowful laments. But Isis was not a goddess to be conquered by grief alone. She was the great enchantress, and she knew the secret words of power. Her hope was not just to give her husband a proper burial, but to do what no one had ever done before, to bring him back. With Nephthys at her side, she began a powerful and ancient ritual. She transformed herself into a kite, a swift and graceful bird of prey, her great wings beating the air above her husband's body. Nephthys did the same. Together, they circled above him, their high, piercing cries a magical lament, a song of such profound love and sorrow that it was said to hold the very power of creation. With each beat of their wings, they fanned the breath of life back into Osiris's body. With each magical word they chanted, they began to reawaken his dormant spirit. It was a spell of immense power, drawn from the deepest well of her love and her divine knowledge of Heir. And for a brief, miraculous moment, the magic worked. A flicker of life returned to Osiris's eyes. A shallow breath passed his lips. He was not fully alive, not the vibrant king he had once been, but a shade. A spirit returned to its body for a fleeting moment, awakened by the sheer, unyielding force of his wife's love. In this brief, stolen reunion, a moment of magic suspended between the worlds of the living and the dead, Isis conceived their child. This was a miraculous conception, a testament to her power, ensuring that a rightful heir to the throne of Egypt would be born, an avenger who would one day challenge the usurper, Set. This child would be Horus, the falcon god. This moment was the pinnacle of Isis's hope. She had found her husband. She had, for an instant, brought him back from the darkness, and she now carried within her the future of their lineage and of all Egypt. It seemed as though her long, sorrowful quest was nearing a triumphant end. She left the body of her husband carefully hidden in the papyrus thicket, guarded by the spirits of the marsh, and went to a more secluded place to prepare for the birth of her son. Her heart, for the first time in so long, felt a fragile sense of peace. But the forces of chaos never truly sleep. One night, Set, the god of the desert, was out hunting gazelles under the cold silver light of the full moon. His path, by a terrible twist of fate, led him through the very marshes where the body of his brother lay hidden. His sharp, animal eyes caught the glint of gold and jewels through the reeds. He approached, his heart filled with a dark suspicion. He pushed aside the papyrus, and there, lying in the moonlight, was the magnificent chest he had cast into the Nile, and within it, the serene, sleeping face of the brother he so deeply hated. A monstrous, inarticulate roar of pure black rage tore from his throat. His plan had been foiled. His enemy had been returned to his own lands. The sight of his brother's peaceful face drove him into a frenzy of absolute, mindless violence. He fell upon the body of Osiris like a desert lion. He did not use a weapon. In his blind, hateful fury, he used his own hands, his own teeth, to tear his brother's body apart. He ripped it into 14 pieces, a terrible and brutal act of desecration, and then, to ensure that Osiris could never be made whole again, he took the scattered pieces and, with a final, triumphant act of malice, he flung them far and wide across the entire length and breadth of the land of Egypt. Some pieces he threw deep into the Nile to be devoured by the crocodiles. Others he scattered in the farthest reaches of the desert to be lost forever in the shifting sands. The brief, beautiful moment of hope was not just ended, it was annihilated. It had just begun again, and in a form that was 1,000 times more difficult, more sorrowful, and more seemingly hopeless than before. The news of Set's final, horrific act of desecration reached Isis not as a shout, but as a silent, soul-shattering psychic blow. The fragile hope that had sustained her, the brief, miraculous reunion in the marshes, was now a cruel and bitter memory. Her beloved was not just lost, he was annihilated. He was scattered, broken, and given over to the wastelands and the devouring creatures of the river. For any other being, mortal or divine, this would have been the end. A moment of absolute and final despair, to tragedy so complete that the only response would be to surrender to grief. But Isis was not any other being. Her love was not a fragile thing that could be broken. It was a primordial force, as fundamental and as enduring as the cosmos itself. Her grief, though it was a weight that could crush mountains, did not paralyze her. It transformed. It crystallized into a single, diamond-hard point of unwavering, relentless purpose. She would not allow her husband to remain scattered. She would not allow his spirit to be lost forever. She would find every single piece of him, no matter how long it took, no matter where it was hidden. She would make him whole again. And so, her second, far more sorrowful and arduous, search began. She fashioned a small skiff for herself from the reeds of the papyrus marsh, a humble vessel for a queen on a holy mission. And in this small boat, she began to journey up and down the great, sacred Nile, the very river that now held the scattered body of her beloved. She was not alone this time. Her loyal sister, Nephthys, the wife of the murderer Set, had abandoned her husband's house of chaos and now stood firmly by Isis's side. Together, the two goddesses, light and shadow, sailed the river on their seemingly impossible quest. They searched everywhere. They waded through the muddy shallows, their hands sifting through the silt. They pushed their way through the dense, tangled thickets of the delta, their eyes scanning every inch of the ground. They called out his name, their voices a constant, sorrowful lament that echoed over the waters. The creatures of the Nile, the birds and the beasts, were moved by her profound devotion. They became her eyes and her ears, and with their help, one by one, she began to find him. In one place, she found his arm, tangled in the roots of a sycamore tree. She tenderly wrapped it in fine linen and performed the sacred rites over it. In another, she found the leg, washed up on a lonely sandbank. Again, she treated it with a deep and loving reverence. With each piece she found, her resolve grew stronger. Her quest became a great and sorrowful pilgrimage, a sacred mapping of the entire land of Egypt. The places where she found the pieces of Osiris became holy sites. It was said that to mark each one, and to throw Set off her trail, she would create a magical duplicate of the body part and bury it with all the honors due to a king, founding a new temple on each spot. And so, the land of Egypt became dotted with the sacred tombs of Osiris, each one a testament to the queen's undying love and her tireless search. She traveled the length of the kingdom, from the southern deserts of Nubia to the northern shores of the Great Green Sea. She found 13 of the 14 pieces, each discovery a small, heartbreaking victory in her war against oblivion. But there was one final piece that she could not find. The 14th piece, the phallus of the king, had been thrown into the deepest part of the Nile and had been immediately devoured by the sharp-toothed Oxyrhynchus fish. This piece was lost to her forever, a final, cruel wound inflicted by her enemy, Set. Even this did not stop her. Her knowledge of magic was as great as her love. If the piece could not be found, then it would have to be recreated. With all 13 pieces gathered, and her quest as complete as it could ever be, Isis returned to the deepest, most secret heart of the papyrus marshes. The time for searching was over. The time for the greatest act of magic the world had ever known was about to begin. She had gathered the scattered fragments of her king. Now, she would attempt to do what seemed utterly impossible, to breathe life back into a body that had been so utterly and completely destroyed. In the deepest, most secluded heart of the Nile Delta, hidden from the eyes of all, a great and final ritual was about to be performed. This was to be the culmination of all of Isis's sorrow, all of her searching, and all of her unparalleled knowledge of Heir. This was to be her greatest and most audacious act of magic, the resurrection of her mutilated husband. She was not alone. By her side was her ever-faithful sister, Nephthys, the embodiment of the sacred rites of mourning. And they had called upon 2 other great and powerful gods for their aid. There was Thoth, and there was Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the dead, he who knew the hidden pathways between the world of the living and the realm of the afterlife. Together, these 4 divine beings gathered around the 13 scattered pieces of the once great king, Osiris. With a solemn and focused grace, Isis began the ritual. She and Nephthys carefully arranged the pieces of Osiris's body on a funerary bier, laying them out in their correct anatomical order, as if they were assembling a sacred puzzle. It could not be found. And so, Isis used her divine magic to fashion a replacement, a phallus of pure gold, magically imbued with the life force of the king. With this final piece, the body of Osiris was, at last, physically whole once more. Now came the most crucial part. The body was whole, but it was still just lifeless flesh. It needed to be preserved, to be made incorruptible, a worthy vessel for a returning spirit. And so, under the guidance of Anubis, the great rite of embalming was performed for the very first time. They washed the body with the sacred waters of the Nile. They anointed it with precious oils and fragrant resins. And then, Isis, with her own divine hands, began to wrap her husband's body in long, clean strips of woven linen. With each strip she wound around him. She chanted a powerful, secret word of magic. Each wrapping was a spell, a knot of divine energy, weaving a protective web around him. She was not just preserving his body, she was re-sanctifying it, transforming it from a mere corpse into an eternal vessel, a sahu, a glorious spiritual body, fit for a god to inhabit once more. When the wrapping was complete, Osiris lay before them, the first mummy, a silent, white and powerful form, his physical body now perfected and made eternal. The final and most difficult act was yet to come. His body was ready, but his spirit, his Ba, was still scattered, lost in the darkness between the worlds. Isis, her heart, a blazing sun of pure, focused love and determination, prepared for her greatest spell. She once again took the form of a great and sacred kite, her magnificent wings spreading out in the gloom of the hidden marsh. She hovered above the mummified form of her husband, her shadow covering him in a protective embrace. She began to beat her wings slowly and rhythmically. But this was not the simple movement of a bird. With each powerful downstroke, she was fanning not just air, but the very breath of life itself. She was creating a whirlwind of pure, magical energy, a vortex of her own divine life force. And she began to chant. Her voice, in her bird form, was a high, piercing, and otherworldly cry that echoed through the hidden dimensions of the cosmos. She was not just mourning now, she was commanding. She was calling out to the scattered fragments of her husband's soul, using her love as a beacon, a lighthouse in the great, dark ocean of oblivion. She called his secret name, she recalled their shared memories, she implored him to return, to re-inhabit the perfect vessel she had prepared for him. It was an act of immense, almost unimaginable magical effort. She poured all of her own life force, all of her knowledge, all of her love into this single, desperate and magnificent spell, and the universe, awed by the sheer, unyielding power of her devotion, relented. A faint, golden light began to glow from within the mummy's wrappings. The spirit of Osiris, drawn from the far corners of the darkness by his wife's irresistible call, had heard her. He had returned. He was not alive in the way he had been before. He could not walk again in the sunlit world of the living. His time in that realm was over, but his spirit was whole, conscious, and once more united with his eternal body. He was resurrected, not as a king of the living, but as something new, something far more powerful. He had become the king of the afterlife, the just and eternal Lord of the dead. But before he descended to his new kingdom, there was one final act of creation. In that sacred, magical moment of his reawakening, Isis, still in her bird form, descended upon his body. And in a final, mystical embrace between the living goddess and the resurrected god, she conceived their son and heir, Horus. Her great quest was complete. She had not only defied her enemy, Set, she had defied death itself. She had gathered the broken pieces of her love and, with her own power, had made him whole and eternal. And from that union of life and death, she had created the single greatest hope for the future, a son who would one day rise to avenge his father and reclaim the throne of Egypt, restoring the divine order of Mad to the world. The great and terrible spell was complete. Osiris, resurrected and made eternal, had descended to his new kingdom to rule as the just and silent lord of the afterlife. The echoes of the great magic faded, leaving Isis once more in the quiet solitude of the papyrus marshes. But she was no longer the grieving widow, nor just the victorious enchantress. Her great quest had transformed her, bestowing upon her a new and even more sacred role. She was now to be a mother. She carried within her the hope of all Egypt, Horus, the divine child, the son of the resurrected king, and the one true heir to the throne. Her focus, once entirely dedicated to her husband, now shifted with a fierce and absolute intensity to the protection of this precious unborn life. Her enemy, Set, the usurper king, still ruled the world of men, and she knew with a mother's unerring instinct that he would stop at nothing to destroy the child who was destined to challenge his illegitimate rule. The world was no longer safe for her. And so, Isis became a fugitive, a divine mother in hiding. The great sprawling marshes of the Nile Delta, the place of her husband's rebirth, now became her secret sanctuary, her nursery. She built a nest for herself deep in the impenetrable thickets, a place hidden from the eyes of gods and men. When her son, Horus, was born, he was not born in a grand palace, but in the humble, lonely wilderness. He was a god born in exile, his life immediately beset by danger. Isis's life became a constant, vigilant struggle to protect her infant son. Her great magical powers were now used not for grand resurrections, but for the intimate daily tasks of a mother protecting her child from a hostile world. She would use spells to make herself and her child invisible to Set spies. She would chant words of power to ward off the venomous snakes and scorpions that infested the marshes. She became the ultimate protector, her intelligence and her magic a living shield around her vulnerable son. The stories of this time are filled with tales of her fierce devotion and her cleverness. In one famous tale, the infant Horus was stung by a deadly scorpion sent by Set. The child lay near death, his body burning with a terrible poison. Isis's grief was immense, but she did not despair. She let out a cry so powerful and so filled with a mother's authority that it stopped the very barge of the sun, god Ra, in its journey across the sky, plunging the world into a sudden, unnatural darkness. She demanded that the gods help her, and Thoth, the god of wisdom, descended and taught her a great and powerful spell to draw the poison from her son's body, saving his life. This story cemented her legacy as Isis Medica, the great healing goddess, the divine physician to whom mortals would pray for centuries to protect their own children from sickness and harm. She was not just a protector, she was also a teacher. In their long, secret years in the marshes, she raised Horus, nurturing not only his body, but his spirit. She taught him the stories of his noble father, Osiris. She instilled in him a deep understanding of Ma'at, of justice and divine order. She trained him for his great and inevitable destiny, the day he would be strong enough to leave the safety of the marshes, to challenge his wicked uncle, and to reclaim his father's stolen throne. In this, Isis's role in the cosmic drama was complete. She had been the perfect wife, whose loyalty was so strong it could conquer death. And now she was the perfect mother, whose fierce protective love could nurture a savior in the heart of the wilderness. Her legacy was forever transformed. She was still the great enchantress, but her magic was now most famously associated with healing and protection. She was still the goddess of the throne, but she was now seen as the divine mother of the king, the source of his legitimacy and the protector of his reign. For the people of ancient Egypt, she became the ultimate symbol of motherhood, the divine ideal of a mother's fierce, unconditional, and all-powerful love. In countless temples and household shrines, she was depicted seated, serenely and majestically, on a throne, tenderly nursing her infant son, Horus. This iconic image of the Divine Mother and her holy child was one of the most beloved and enduring in all of Egyptian religion, a symbol of hope, of protection, and of the promise of a just king who would restore balance to the world. She was the goddess who had faced the deepest darkness, who had endured the most profound loss, and who had emerged not broken, but transformed into the ultimate symbol of life, of healing, and of a love so powerful it could create a new dawn from the ashes of despair. The great story of Isis, the goddess who defied death and wove the broken pieces of her world back together, now comes to its gentle close. Her epic journey is complete, her legacy as the great enchantress and the Divine Mother forever etched into the stars. As you lie here, poised on the edge of the mystical realm of dreams, let her spirit be your guardian through the night. May her magic of protection form a sacred, invisible shield around you. May it ward off any troubled thoughts, any lingering anxieties, and keep you safe from all that is chaotic and discordant. May her healing power gently mend the weary parts of your mind and your spirit. May it soothe the wounds of the day, wash away any sorrow, and restore your inner balance, just as she gathered the scattered pieces of her beloved. May you feel the unwavering strength of her loyalty in your own heart. May it remind you of the profound power of your own connections, of the love that you give and the love that you receive. Into the deep and silent waters of sleep, remember her greatest lesson, that every ending, every darkness holds within it the seed of a new beginning. Sleep is not a small death, but a gentle journey of restoration from which you too will be reborn with the morning light. Let her magic guide you. Let her love protect you. The night is a safe and sacred space. Rest now, child of the stars. Your own rebirth awaits in the dawn.